Ditch the grains. So grains biblically used to actually be very nutrient dense. They used to have a ton of B vitamins, which feed the Krebs cycle, which feed energy for you, which is where runners or competitive athletes got this carb loading concept. That's the right word. However, what we've done is processed grains all the way down so that all you're doing is eating sugar or chemicals when you eat them. In the United States, there is no healthy grains. There's no organic grains. We have destroyed our crops. They just came out with an article that said 100% of non-organic grains have glycophosphate in them. Glycophosphate's a chemical. Dr. Kyle will talk about it later, but it also causes leaky gut. It causes neurodegenerative diseases. My dad has Parkinson's disease, and that is one of the chemical reactants that pushes Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, dementia, and all of those. So being aware of where glycophosphates come from and avoiding them, and they're in our grains. Overeating grains can lead to...
No. Where do I even begin? There is so much misinformation packed into this one video that I don't even know where to start. Maybe we'll start with this. I don't know what she means with glycophosphates, but I guess she's talking about glyphosate. If she's talking about glyphosate, then we are talking about a herbicide, which is actually very common in today's age. And it's very easy and super lazy, in my humble opinion, to do if you were to point out one specific thing from a food item and tell people to avoid it because XYZ causes this, this, and this. That's exactly what she's doing here with the example of using glyphosates and telling you that it will cause neurodegenerative diseases. That's equivalent of me, a vegan, telling you to avoid fish because it contains mercury and that's probably not healthy for you. I wish I could tell you that, but we have to look at the scientific literature and human health outcome data objectively. And when you look at human health outcome data of people consuming fish, you see that they do very well. The topic is about grains, so let's have a look at what human health outcome data is actually showing us. We'll start off with a systematic review and dose response meta-analysis of prospective cohort studies. They included 20 prospective cohort studies, so this is a very huge sample size. They had a follow-up period of 5.5 to 26 years. And sadly, over 190,000 deaths occurred. Over 25,000 of those deaths occurred from cardiovascular disease, over 32,000 from total cancer, and over 2,600 from specific cancers in almost 2.3 million participants. What did the people actually found at people consuming these grains that are obviously devoid of all the nutrients, and you're basically just consuming herbicides? To my surprise, not. They actually found the following. Looking at all-cause mortality, an increase of 3 servings of total whole grains per day, that's around 90 grams per day, was associated with a decreased risk for all-cause mortality of 17%. Total whole grain intake led to a 16% decrease, and specific whole grain foods led to an 18% decrease of mortality from cardiovascular disease. And the researchers did something really cool, as was already alluded to in the title. They did a dose-response analysis. They concluded that each additional 3 servings of total whole grains per day was associated with a 25% lower risk of mortality from cardiovascular disease, and around a 6% decrease of mortality from total cancers. Let's have a look at another systematic review and dose-response meta-analysis of prospective cohort studies. 19 cohort studies were included, with over 1 million participants, and sadly over 96,000 deaths occurred. And they found pretty much very similar findings. 16% decrease for total mortality, 17% decrease for cardiovascular disease mortality, and 6% decrease for cancer mortality. And of course, they also did and performed a dose-response analysis. And the researchers concluded that each 28 grams per day of whole grains was associated with a 9% lower risk for total mortality, 14% lower risk for cardiovascular disease mortality, and 3% lower risk for cancer mortality. And look at that, there's even more research. A meta-analysis of prospective cohort studies looked at the same outcomes. 14 studies were included in this meta-analysis. They included over 780,000 participants, over 97,000 total deaths occurred, and almost 24,000 from cardiovascular disease deaths, and over 37,000 from cancer deaths. And here you have the results, and we have a very similar pattern occurring here in the results as well. And some of you grain skeptics or grain haters are probably looking at me and tell me, well, this is just observational data. I personally love observational data, but hey, why not just go with the flow and look at randomized controlled trials? Because if we can combine the results of randomized controlled trials and prospective cohort studies, we can make a really strong case for whole grain consumption. This systematic review meta-analysis of randomized controlled studies included over 24 randomized controlled studies. And we can basically just skip to the results or the conclusion of this systematic review. And looking at the results, we can see that the consumption of whole grain diets lowers LDL and total cholesterol compared to other people that consumed a non-whole grain diet. And the biggest cholesterol lowering effects were seen in whole grain oats. So I really don't understand how misinformation tends to go so viral. Telling people to avoid seed oils, food that contain phytates, oxalates, lectins, herbicide, pesticides, you name it, is simply asinine when we have human health outcome data stating the opposite. Just because a food item has a small trace of something doesn't necessarily mean that it has a bad effect on our health. And one last thing, big claims need a lot and tons of evidence to back those claims up. And she didn't cite one single study. How much are you consuming whole grains on a daily basis? Feel free to let me know in the comment section. I would also love to hear your opinion about this topic in the comment section as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.